Sometimes there are videos that don't really require a sermon after them, but you're getting one today anyway. So you may hear Amy's story and think, well, that's really awesome, but why would you do that? And so today I want to take a step back from Amy's story and share with you the why behind giving and help you maybe think differently about the way that you approach giving and generosity in your own life. We're doing that as part of a series called 5 Things God Uses. My name's Ryan, and I'm one of the pastors here, and in the midst of this series, we're looking at 5 things that we believe God can use to help you grow in your faith relationship. Now, these 5 things are each connected back to one of our 5 practices. If you've been around the summit since the beginning of the year, you've heard us talk about this at some point. We have 5 practices that we're focusing on this year: praying, growing, giving, serving, and inviting. And each one of these 5 practices, we believe, can be pivotal to help us move forward. So today, one of the things that God uses is connected back to one of these practices. Now, the thing that God can use that we're focusing on today is this: private disciplines. Now, you may have at some point in your life decided you're going to do something, accomplish something, become something, and you worked on it for a minute and results didn't come as fast as you had hoped, and so you just gave up on it altogether. Can anyone relate? Good, one of us can. That's awesome. I love that. I thought maybe I was the only one, but I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. See, when we start doing something in private and we don't see the results that we want immediately, often we turn away because it's harder than we thought that it was going to be. But here's what we need to know. When it comes to private disciplines in your spiritual life, in your work life, in your relationships, results are not immediate. They take some time to develop. It's not instantaneous. Maybe you recognize this person. This is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is maybe the most famous nun to ever live, maybe one of the most famous people to ever live, and her story is one of being committed to a private discipline, and it led her to the place that you now know her for. Let me tell you what I mean. At the age of 12, Mother Teresa felt the call to become a nun. And she began to gear her education towards entering the convent when she turned 18, and she did. When she turned 18, she went to the convent. She received the training that she needed there to be one of the nuns in her convent, and she began her career. Mother Teresa's career was to be a teacher. And for 20 years, Mother Teresa taught in the convent. She taught at the Christian school that was connected there, and she was investing in the lives of young people. It wasn't until she had been teaching for 20 years that Mother Teresa was introduced to those living in the slums of Calcutta. All of this work that was happening in the background, the preparation from 12 to 18, the teaching for 20 years, all of this prepared her for this moment of walking into the slums and seeing the poverty, and from that moment forward, her life was different. But she didn't start there. It wasn't instantaneous. That's not where it began. It didn't all happen at once. It was a series of events. It was a process of growth that led Mother Teresa to become a Nobel Peace Prize winner and perhaps one of the most famous Christians to ever live. And so today we begin thinking about what it looks like to have private disciplines. And you might wonder what discipline we're going to talk about, and maybe not because you listened to the video ahead of time, but the discipline we're going to be talking about is one that's prescribed to us in the teachings of Jesus. This happens in Matthew chapter 6. This is what Jesus says. He says, "But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father, who sees everything, will reward you." The private discipline that we're discussing today is the discipline of giving. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, giving again. Or maybe you're thinking, I don't ever even come to church, and every time I go to church, they talk about giving, or all the church ever talks about is giving. So if it's your first time, I just want to say, I'm sorry, you picked the right/wrong Sunday to prove your point, right? So today is the message about giving. And let me just say this to you. A lot of people, a lot of places, they don't want to talk about giving, or they shy away from giving because pastors manipulate people into giving. You've heard the stories of the guys who's trying to buy the jet and all the things, and I get it. Those are a little bit off-putting, but here's what I know to be true. If we are faithful in the way that we treat our finances with God, it changes our relationship with Him. If we are faithful in the way that we treat our finances toward God, it will change the way that we relate to Him. Which is why I have no shame in saying today that it's an incredibly important discipline for us to work out in our lives. And there's a reason that this is a private discipline, because as Jesus says, it's between you and Him. But these gifts that we give are given with a heart of gratitude and thankfulness. And it changes our relationship when we begin to put Him first in all areas of our life, including this one that tends to be a little harder to do. So today I'm going to tell you a story from the Old Testament. And it's a story that really just has two characters with a few other people interspersed throughout the story. But it's a story that tells us about the principles related to being a person who is giving. This is something that will help you regardless of where you are on your faith journey. If you showed up today and you're like not interested in the church thing, only here for lunch afterwards, that's okay. The message today from the Old Testament can give you some handles to grab a hold of to live differently outside of this place, and it will make your life better because of it. It will make you better at your job. It will make you better at your relationships. And I believe that if you walked in today and you're a person of faith, I believe it will help you take steps forward on your faith journey. This story comes from the book of 2 Kings. It's in chapter 4. And you may have started reading the Bible and you quit by the time you got to 2 Kings because you got to Chronicles and all the names before that. And that's totally understandable. So this story may very well be new to you today. And so let me introduce you to this story and share with you 3 principles about giving. The first thing we see today out of this story is that we should be people who give generously. Let's pick up the story in 2 Kings 4, verse 8. One day, Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. Now, understanding the context that we're reading this is really important. So Elisha is a prophet. Prophets traveled from town to town. They shared God's word with the people. And oftentimes, they were just dependent on the people to provide a place to stay, something to eat. They needed the people to be their support as they were doing their ministry. So that's character number 1. The other character we have is an anonymous woman. A woman called the Shunammite woman. She lives in this town of Shunem. She's a person who sees someone in need and chooses to meet that need. She sees someone who needs food, and so what does she do? She invites him over to eat. She sees someone who has a need, and she chooses in that moment to be the one who is going to meet that need. And generosity can be a really tricky thing for us, because we can give in such a way that it makes a difference in our lives and makes us feel better because we've done the easy thing, and then we can be a person who gives generously, a person who gives a little bit more than what's expected, who maybe goes a little bit above and beyond. And what the prophet Elisha knows is that whenever he's in Shunem, he's covered. This woman has it. This woman is going to take care of him. All he has to do is stop by, and his needs in that moment are provided for. This is the beginning of a powerful story about how God is going to bless this woman because of the way that she gives. The first thing we see is that we should give generously. The second thing is that we should give extravagantly. The story continues, verse 9. She said to her husband, "I am sure this man who stops in from time to time is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Then he will have a place to stay whenever he comes by." A meal is generous. A place to stay, that's extravagant. You've had people over for dinner before, haven't you? And when you invite someone over for dinner, you go back and forth for 3 or 4 days trying to find a time, right? Texting back and forth. And then you pick a time and you go to the grocery store and you buy the ingredients and you bring them home, and then the day comes. It's time to invite the people over to your house, so what do? You cook the food and you clean your house, don't you? When my house growing up, we had this thing where we cleaned things that didn't need to be cleaned when people were coming over. maybe you can relate to this. This isn't from Thanksgiving, but listen, if you're going to someone's house, compliment their baseboards because that's what they've spent the day cleaning. I spent more time on my hands and knees scrubbing the baseboards for our family to come over who had dirtier houses than us than I could ever count. And yet that's what we focused our time on. This woman has done that, okay? She got the food, she cleaned the baseboards, she's ready, but then she says, there's something more that we could do. We have the resources, we have the energy, we have the availability, and so what do? They do something more. They create an Airbnb on their roof. And they say to this prophet, this man of God, they say, anytime you're passing through, this is a place that you can come. This is a place you can be. This is a place that you can stay. And we've gone from an easy need to meet to a much more difficult need to meet because this guy is not going home when the meal's over. He's simply going up to his own room. He's staying. Time and space and energy has now been sacrificed. It's an extravagant gift. Some of you may have heard that I have an interest group, a community group, that we've been searching for the best burnt ends in Kansas City. I'm happy to report the results to you. We found them. We found them at Slaps Barbecue. Here's a picture of the meal. Slaps was an incredible place for us to go. It was the 5th stop on the barbecue tour. I was confident it would be the best, but it won by a lot when the scores were calculated. We had a blast eating there, and the food was incredible. Now, let me tell you this, though. The experience is what made it the best. See, all the places that we went did the same thing to provide food for us. They took our orders, they took our money, they gave us food. That's how it went. And that was great. That's how it should start. But Slaps went above and beyond. They closed their upstairs rooftop patio for us. We had a greeter at the bottom of the stairs directing us where we needed to go. They made sure that we were ushered through the line together so we could go through and pay. I think it was the cheapest burn-ins that we purchased on the tour. And then after we had our food, the pitmaster came up and personally shared with our group the history of Kansas City barbecue, why he cooks barbecue, and the very best part is on every table was a bottle of Slaps Barbecue Godfather sauce. What I'm going to tell you is the best barbecue sauce there is in Kansas City. It was unreleased when they gave it to us, and yet they shared with us. It was extravagant. Were the burn ends good? Yes. But it was all the other above and beyond that made Slaps the very best place to go. When we give, we don't want to stop with what's easy. We don't want to stop with what's convenient. We want to give extravagantly. And finally, this woman chooses to give selflessly. Verse 11. One day, Elisha returned to Shunem and went up to his upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her." When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown to us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you with the king, to the commander of the army?" "No," she replies. "My family takes good care of me." Lest anyone thinks she's giving simply to receive, when given the opportunity to receive something back for what she's given to the prophet, she simply says, "No, I'm good. I've got it covered. My family has taken good care of me. There's nothing you can do to repay me." Why? It's because this is true. The blessing of giving is in the not receiving. The blessing of giving is when you're not expecting something in return. The blessing of giving is to simply see the look on the face of the person who's receiving the gift. And the principles of giving remind us of the power of our giving, because even if giving's new to us, we know what it looks like when we give someone the most thoughtful, perfect gift that they could expect. So today, I want to invite you to consider what it might look like to give like this, to give generously, to give extravagantly, and to give selflessly. Because when you do, what's on the other side is so incredible. The Shunammite woman was simply sowing seeds into God's kingdom. She was helping support the work that was happening. And this is a story that most of you can relate to. You give to the church you love, don't you? And when you pull in the parking lot and you see what's happening, you can think, I contributed to that. I was part of that. I helped do that. But you don't give because you want something in return. You give simply because you want to see God's work done in the world. And it's amazing to see what God can do. In fact, it was amazing to see what God did in the life of this Shunammite woman. Verse 18. One day when her child was older, he went out to help his father who was working with the harvesters. Suddenly he cried out, "My head hurts, my head hurts." His father said to one of the servants, "Carry him home to his mother." That's a Mother's Day sermon, I think, right? Mom's taking care of all the problems. So the servant took him home, and his mother held him on her lap. But around noontime he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door and left him there. This woman never forgot the stories of what Elisha had done. She was a supporter. She knew what God could do through this prophet. And so she tracked him down and brought him back to where the child was laying. And Elisha went upstairs, and the scripture tells us that he breathed into the child's mouth. And God breathed life back into the child's body. He was resurrected. He was healed in that moment. Think about this. When you give, you become a part of every story at the church you love. Why was Elisha doing ministry close enough by that the woman could go find him? Because of the support he had received from the community around him. And sometimes the miracle comes full circle, and you're blessed beyond measure. I'm aware that we live in a transactional culture where the question of the day is, what's in it for me? If I give, what do I receive? But this woman's giving had nothing to do with that. She gave with no strings attached, simply with a heart of joy. We never give for a blessing, but we know that when we give, we will always be blessed. See, the best part about being generous in the kingdom of God is that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And when you least expect it, and when you most need it, joy and peace is returned to you in a time of need. A couple weeks ago, I asked you a question, and the question was, will you fill out this survey? And hundreds of you responded, and I'm thankful for that. And we learned some things from this survey. Now, here are some of the reasons that we wanted to do the survey. Number one is last year, your church grew 18% in attendance. This year, we're up over 12% in attendance. We've had over 600 new people come through the doors of the church. We're wanting to make sure that we're doing the right things and hitting the target in some kind of a way. It's important for us to know that we're not just getting people here, but that we're meeting the needs that people actually have. And so one of the questions we asked is, what is most important to you at the church? And you answered, and here's what you said. Number one, you said having weekend worship services, a place that you can come and do this. You can hear the teachings of Scripture. You can worship together. You can fellowship. You can grab a cup of coffee. You can find a way to serve. You can get connected. All of those things happen on Sunday morning. You said that's the most important thing that we need to be doing. The second thing you said is that we need to have kids and student ministry. We want to meet the needs of your children and your grandchildren and the children of the people who you invite to come with you every single week. And so we do that. We provide for that need on an ongoing basis, whether it's on Sunday morning for kids or Wednesday night for students. We're making sure that we're meeting those needs. And number three, you said we need to make sure that we're a church for our community. Yes, it says it on the wall. It says on the wall that this is a church for the community. But the question is, are we actually? Are we doing that? And so we need to be thinking about how we're meeting needs in the community. And maybe what you don't know is during the week, this room is transformed into a mission center to make an impact in our community. That whole section of the room is the chairs are removed and tables are set up, and it becomes the packing center for Summit Lunch. And all the lunches that go out and bless kids in our city throughout the course of the week are packed right here in this room. We're continuing to think about how we can be a church for our community. And this is what the private discipline of giving makes possible. Every time you give, it ensures that we can make these things happen. So, what is your plan to be a person who gives? Since Rebecca and I got married 22 years ago next month, we have given 10% of our income, at least, to the work that God is doing in the world. We've been tithers. And there were moments that was really hard. There was a season in time where we went from being a two-income family to a one-income family overnight, not by choice, unexpected. And you know what we did? The next Sunday, we showed up to church and we wrote a check. Yes, it was the olden days. We wrote a check. And the check was less because we went from 2 incomes to 1, but the check was still a tithe. And what we saw time and time again is that even when it didn't look good, and even when the numbers didn't quite add up, that God's blessings were always evident in our lives. We were able to meet our needs. We were able to do fun things even. And my question for you is, how are you giving? We have a resource available for you today. I want to invite you to grab it on the way out if you'd like. It's this green book, and it's called When You Give. And this is a theological basis for giving at the Summit Church. And so if you're thinking about, okay, so how do I give and where do I go and what does it look like? This is a great resource for you to pick up and take with you to think about. Because finding a practical next step is what we need in order to make sure that we're continuing to grow in this private discipline of giving. Every gift you give matters because your generosity unlocks possibility. Henry Perry knew this truth well. He's a guy who was born in 1875. That's his picture. He was born in Tennessee, and he actually spent his youth working on the steamboats as a cook. And so he'd cook for the people traveling on the steamboats down the Mississippi, or those who were working would come into port, and he would have something for them to eat. And by 1907, he had made his way from Tennessee and the Mississippi River all the way to Kansas City. And he settled in Kansas City. But he took this love for cooking with him. And when he showed up, he decided he was going to open a food cart. And he did. 1907, food cart opened in the garment district. And this is a place where he really began to understand what it looked like to have a restaurant and cook for people. And in 1910, he opened his very first restaurant. And he became known as the barbecue guy. I think we have another photo here that shows kind of some of the things that he served. Maybe not. Yes, okay. He served barbecued meats like possum and hog and coon. So not all the stuff that we would want to eat today, but this is the stuff they ate back then. And so he served it up. And every day they would serve until they sold out. And he had a guy cooking alongside him who was his apprentice that really became a close friend. And this apprentice's name is Charlie Bryant. And for years, Perry and Bryant cooked side by side until 1940 when Henry died and Charlie took over the operation and opened what you now know as Arthur Bryant's Barbecue. And when it first took off, Arthur Bryant's Barbecue was a good place to go, but didn't have a national name. It wasn't like Kansas City's a barbecue town. It wasn't like that at all. The locals loved it, but it wasn't that big of a deal until 1972. And in 1972, Calvin Trillin wrote an article about Kansas City barbecue. And here's what he said. The main course at Bryant's, as far as I'm concerned, is something given away for free. The burnt edges of the brisket. The counterman just pushes them over to the side, and anyone who wants them helps himself. I dream of those burned edges. Me too. Sometimes when I'm in some awful overpriced restaurant in some strange town, trying to choke down some $3 hamburger that tastes like a burned sponge, a blank look comes over me. I have just realized that at that very moment, someone in Kansas City is being given those burned edges for free. What some people may have viewed as waste or something that could easily be thrown away, Bryant viewed as an opportunity for blessing. And instead of tossing it in the trash, he generously made it available to all who wanted to take it. And these burnt ends changed the landscape of Kansas City barbecue forever. Generosity unlocks possibility. When we're willing to be people who give, it makes a difference in our lives and the lives of people around us. And it changes the way that we relate to God. The God who loved us so much that he sent his son for us. So why do we give? We give because Jesus first gave to us.